Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is August 9th. On this day in 2014, an unarmed black teenager, Michael Brown, was shot and killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. Michael Brown's death sparked outrage, protest, and ultimately a nationwide movement demanding accountability, equality, and reform. Today, we're revisiting a moment that forever changed America's national conversation on race, policing, and justice. And if you've ever wondered what case radicalized me, it's this one. So let's get started. It was just after noon on a hot summer Saturday, August 9th, 2014, when 18-year-old Michael Brown and his friend Dorian Johnson walked down Canfield Drive in Ferguson, Missouri. They weren't doing anything unusual, just walking in the street. But what started as a normal afternoon soon turned deadly. Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson, driving a department-issued SUV, pulled up alongside them. According to Johnson, Wilson used profanity, telling them to get on the sidewalk. Brown replied that they were almost at their destination. But instead of moving on, Wilson reversed his SUV abruptly, cutting them off. What followed was a tense and chaotic confrontation. Wilson later testified that Brown pushed his cruiser door shut when he tried to open it. From inside the vehicle, Wilson said a struggle broke out. He described Brown as overpowering and described himself as, quote, like a 5-year-old holding on to Hulk Hogan, end quote. It should be noted, though, that Brown and Wilson are both large men. They're both around 6'4", though Brown did way more than Wilson. Wilson said that he fired 2 shots from inside the SUV, one of which grazed Brown's hand. Johnson and other witnesses offered a very different account. Brown was never aggressive, they said, just scared and trying to get away. After the initial gunfire, Brown and Johnson ran, but moments later, Brown turned back. Johnson testified that Brown raised his hands and said he was unarmed. Witnesses echo that story, and "hands up, don't shoot" became a rallying cry that went far beyond Ferguson. Wilson gave chase. He claimed that Brown charged at him, reaching toward his waistband, and Wilson fired repeatedly. When it was all over, Brown had been shot 6 times, all from the front, including 2 shots to the head. Again, these are Wilson's claims that Mike Brown, who was unarmed, nobody disputes that at this point, reached toward his waistband. But for what? Nothing was there. There was no reason for him to have done that at all. He also claimed that Mike Brown punched him twice in the face and that he was afraid a 3rd punch would kill him. Yet, photos taken of Darren Wilson later that day showed 0 injuries on his face. Though I do remember the right circulating a photo of a completely different person with an orbital bone fracture and claiming that it was Wilson. It was not. But the shooting was only the beginning. They left Michael Brown's body in the middle of Canfield Drive for more than 4 hours, uncovered, baking in the hot afternoon sun. It was visible to neighbors, to family members. Residents were horrified and traumatized. The delay in removing Brown's body and the lack of information from authorities turned tragedy into outrage. By the next day, the community had reached a breaking point. A candlelight vigil turned into a confrontation. A Quick Trip convenience store was looted and set on fire. Police described scenes of chaos. Storefronts were smashed, protesters clashed with officers, and looters raced from the scene with stolen goods. But people on the ground described police who were confrontational and looking to escalate situations. Reporters on the ground were tear-gassed and shot with rubber bullets. Reporters, not protesters. It was a chaotic situation, and police were not de-escalating it. As an example, CNN's Don Lemon was among protesters who were originally told by authorities to stand in a particular location. So they did, but then some other police officers came by and told them to move. During this confusion, Don Lemon, a reporter for CNN, was shoved by a police officer. That officer was later suspended after he was caught on video making racist, sexist, and homophobic remarks. Despite the violence, protesters continued to fill the streets of Ferguson. Their hands raised high, many chanted, "Hands up, don't shoot." Whether literal or not, the phrase captured the anguish of a community that felt targeted, unheard, and unprotected. State officials soon intervened. Governor Jay Nixon declared a state of emergency and imposed curfews. The Missouri State Highway Patrol, led by Captain Ron Johnson, a Ferguson native, was brought in to de-escalate tensions. Johnson's presence offered a brief glimmer of hope, but tear gas, rubber bullets, and heavily armed vehicles returned night after night. Journalists were arrested, protesters continued to be tear gassed, and Amnesty International condemned the police response as a violation of civil liberties. Still, from the ashes of the Quick Trip rose something more powerful, a movement. That burned-out lot became known as QT People's Park. Residents brought food, water, and candles. It became a hub for community healing and protest. Across the country and across the world, images from Ferguson captured attention. Hashtags like Hands Up Don't Shoot and Black Lives Matter gained traction. Athletes, celebrities, and activists all joined the cause. Ferguson was no longer just a small Missouri town. It was a symbol of something so much bigger. As national attention zeroed in on Ferguson, the Department of Justice stepped in. A civil rights investigation began not just into the shooting of Michael Brown, but into the Ferguson Police Department as a whole. In March 2015, the DOJ released a searing report. It revealed that Ferguson's criminal justice system routinely violated citizens' rights. Police targeted Black residents for traffic stops, citations, and arrests at grossly disproportionate rates. They were encouraged to do so not for safety, but to generate revenue. Internal emails revealed blatant racism among city officials. Attorney General Eric Holder called the findings shocking, but the DOJ didn't file charges against Darren Wilson, citing lack of sufficient evidence to prove that he acted unlawfully. But the broader picture was clear. Ferguson's problems weren't just about one officer. They were systemic. The city entered into a federal consent decree in 2016, agreeing to sweeping reforms. Body cameras for officers, de-escalation training, limits on court fines, and civilian oversight. It was a step toward accountability, but for many residents, it came too late. On November 24, 2014, St. Louis County Prosecutor Bob McCulloch announced that a grand jury had decided not to indict Darren Wilson. The decision landed like a thunderclap. McCulloch presented all the evidence to the jury, thousands of pages, dozens of witnesses, and then left the decision in their hands. But critics accused him of hiding behind the process, while supporters claimed that it was unusually transparent. However, transcripts later revealed that McCulloch never cross-examined Darren Wilson. He was the prosecutor, but he acted more like he was Wilson's attorney. Instead of prosecuting the case and asking questions to get to the truth of the matter, McCulloch allowed Wilson to simply give his narrative, and his words were treated as gospel, despite the many plot holes. The night that the grand jury decision was announced, protests erupted. Buildings burned and police cars were overturned. In cities across America, New York, Oakland, Chicago, demonstrators filled the streets. President Barack Obama addressed the nation, urging calm. Michael Brown's family pleaded for peace. But for many, the grand jury's decision felt like confirmation that the system was broken. Michael Brown's death and everything that followed didn't just change Ferguson. It changed the country. Black Lives Matter, a movement that had begun the year before, surged into the national consciousness. Ferguson became a rallying cry for those demanding police reform, racial justice, and an end to systemic oppression. In the years since, reforms have been proposed, debated, and in some places implemented. Body cameras, civilian review boards, bans on chokeholds, and new use of force policies. But progress has been uneven. Ferguson's court system was forced to end its reliance on fines for funding. The city paid millions of dollars in settlements, and yet the pain remains. Michael Brown didn't live to see 19, but his death pushed the nation to look in the mirror, to ask the hard questions, and to begin, however imperfectly, the long road toward justice. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found Michael's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!